Batman doesn't kill people. It's one of his most sacred rules, and though he has actually broken it a few times over the years, for the most part he does stick to it. But even so, the guy does still inflict a lot of punishment on criminals, especially when he's trying to get them to talk. A lot of the time violence isn't actually needed, as they're just so scared of Batman that they'll talk anyway.
Okay, I'll tell.
What did he say?
You don't want to know.
But sometimes fear is not enough, and Batman needs to get physical. And so this video is going to take a look at some of Batman's most violent and intense interrogations. The Arkham games. Now the Arkham games involve a fair amount of interrogation in gameplay and in cutscenes, and the most violent ones are probably in Arkham Knight and Arkham Origins. One interrogation sees Batman drive the Batmobile over someone's head, or at least threaten to do so unless he gives up enough information.
Where is he?
He's gone to see the little man.
Though this one is more terror and the threat of violence rather than the actual violence itself, as he obviously doesn't drive the Batmobile over the criminal's head, as this would violate his no killing rule, and he obviously wasn't going to do it. But the important point is, the criminal thinks he was going to do it, and that's why he talks. Now, one of the best things about these interrogations is the overly dramatic but kind of badass lines he uses.
Face or legs? Which one do I break first?
Talk, or I'll crush every bone in your body.
Please don't lie to me. I only just got Riddler's last informant's blood off my face.
And of course, he not only beats them up, but occasionally breaks some bones.
If you're lying, I'll break the other one.
The other one.
He also dangles a couple of guys off of rooftops, including the corrupt Mayor Quincy Sharp in Arkham City, who is so terrified he tells him everything. And of course, a random gangster in Arkham Origins who is named Loose Lips, who he first accidentally chokes unconscious.
Where is he? I swear.
Damn.
And then he drops him off of a rooftop and onto a Christmas tree. 'Tis the season after all. And of course, every interrogation ends with him knocking the guy out, and most likely causing some serious brain damage. But it's not just the random thugs who get it bad. He also throws the Penguin around like a beach ball. And he also pours away Mr. Freeze's cooling liquid, which is the only thing that is keeping him alive.
Today is not a good day to push me, Victor.
Stop! There's a security override chip.
And of course, he punches Killer Croc unconscious, which, considering the fact that he's a 12-foot tall crocodile with a healing factor, is actually rather impressive, because you've really got to punch that guy in order to knock him unconscious. So all in all, we see some pretty violent, though pretty entertaining interrogations in the Arkham games.
I want teeth. I want answers.
Telltale Games. The most intense interrogation is definitely when you're getting information out of a thug that you find in a crime scene. And what makes this one of the worst interrogations is that the game lets the player decide how much they're going to hurt him. So you could make this a less painful interrogation if you choose, or you can do what most people do, what I certainly did, and beat the holy hell out of this random criminal. So Batman starts by just punching him and choking him, pretty standard for his interrogations, but this doesn't seem to be getting the job done. So Batman ties him up and dangles him upside down. Then he takes a metal pipe and he smashes the guy's ribs in with it. And he likely punctures one or more of the guy's lungs, because that's what happens when you bash in someone's chest with a metal pipe. And with this being a Telltale game, you do of course get to choose your actions, which means you can choose whether to hit him in the head, the ribs, or not to hit him at all. And if you hit him in the head, you break his nose and quite likely cause some very serious brain damage. But this still isn't getting the guy talking enough, so Batman ups his game even more and decides to crack the guy's arm in half.
You'll never hold a gun steady again.
And the player can actually break the guy's arm himself, just with a few keystrokes. You can also choose not to break it, but let's be honest, we all did decide to break it. and it is a bad and brutal break. But the break itself isn't really what's so bad about this, it's the fact that the player actually does it themselves. Normally you're just watching the screen as Batman does it, but in this case you are directly controlling the interrogation and how violent you go. And because of that, it just makes this so much more intense. And Batman actually does all of this in the vicinity of 2 cops, although Commissioner Gordon does seem fine with letting the whole thing go. Batman is his BFF after all. And this scene also has some great lines.
Don't make me add your corpse to this graveyard.
You trying to scare a confession out of me? I won't break.
Your bones will. You know you can bleed to death without ever spilling a drop. All on the inside. Tell me the plan, or I start swinging.
And really for me, I think these lines are part of the reason that these interrogation scenes are so entertaining. I mean really, they're so over the top dramatic it almost seems like a cliche. But when we're talking about a Batman show or a Batman game, it just seems to work perfectly. Another interrogation in this game is in a police interviewing room, and Batman basically just punches the hell out of the criminal, bashing his hands until all the fingers are black and likely broken, and he smashes the guy's head in and possibly breaks his cheekbone. You can take a less violent path, as you can choose what Batman does in this game. But if you go violent, Batman really dishes out a beating that this criminal will never fully recover from, no matter how much hospital treatment and rehabilitation he gets. A violent scene, but personally I think the other one is worse, as he definitely has a broken arm and ribs, whereas this guy only maybe has broken bones. It doesn't quite look as brutal. Although to be fair, I think this guy's fingers are definitely broken. The Nolan films. Undoubtedly the best live-action Batman films ever made to date, and as such they have some pretty intense interrogations. In the first film, he dangles dirty cop Detective Flask off a rooftop and then drops him repeatedly, and this scene has one of my favourite Batman lines.
I don't know. I swear to God.
Swear to me!
Now I have no idea what "swear to me" really means, because when you think about it, it doesn't actually make much sense. But I do absolutely love the line for some reason. And of course we have the infamous Joker interrogation, when he basically spends 15 minutes just punching the hell out of the Joker. And though we don't really see any serious injuries out of this, as the Joker seems to be more enjoying it than actually being hurt, I'm sure he was still feeling it in the morning. After all, being punched by Batman in his custom-made armour, well, that's going to leave a mark or two. But the most violent interrogation of all is definitely when Batman gets mob boss Maroni and just flat drops him off of a fire escape.
From this height, fall wouldn't kill me.
I'm counting on it.
And if the breaks had been worse, he could have ended up having parts of his legs amputated, or he could have just bled out from the injury. But I guess Batman worked out how high it would take to break them, but not have the bone puncture the skin. How would he do that? Well, by being Batman, of course. And we do have to remember that Maroni is a mob boss who's killed a lot of people and probably tortured quite a few too, so it's hard to feel too bad about this happening to him. But ultimately, this is actually the problem with most Batman interrogations. They are cool to watch, but the violence level really makes Batman seem more like one of the bad guys than one of the good guys. As Penguin himself has said,
I seen your act. I ain't done nothing you not done.
Of course, the difference is that Batman uses the information for good purposes, and the people he's beating up are violent gangsters who hurt people, and if Batman doesn't get violent with them, he won't get answers. Basically, he goes to the places the cops can't. And as Superman has actually found out in the past, if you play the good Boy Scout and don't resort to this type of interrogation, you just don't get information.
How does Batman do it?
The Dark Knight Returns Part 1. It's not always violence or the imminent threat of falling from a great height that gets a bad guy talking. As I said in the beginning, sometimes just being Batman is enough. And in this film, the bad guy backs away from Batman in fear and then falls out of a window, cutting himself so bad that he starts to bleed to death. And Batman is the only one who can get him to a hospital in time, which he'll only do of course if the criminal gives him information. Which the criminal does. He wants to stay alive after all. So it's still a very violent way to get someone to talk, as he was threatening him with death. He probably wouldn't have followed through on it. Well, actually, in this film he probably would have. This Batman is much more hardcore than others, so he wouldn't kill necessarily, but he probably would leave him to bleed to death. But still, the point I want to make with this one is that it's not actually about him being violent in all these interrogations. It's just the fear of death that Batman uses, because he is kind of a personification of fear, and that can be enough. Son of Batman. In this film, he's interrogating Killer Croc, who's refusing to speak, and so he just rips his tail off. It's a quick moment, but this is the same as ripping off someone's foot. It is an amputation at the end of the day. True, he's a crocodile man, and the tail was the result of drugs and mutations, and it's possible it would have fallen off on its own as he had lost access to those drugs. But all we know for sure is, he had a tail and he ripped it off. He ripped off his limb. Of course, it gets Batman's point across that he's not afraid of Killer Croc, and can therefore give him drugs to help with his withdrawal from the super mutation drugs he was on. But in my opinion, this is actually completely unnecessary. It is a really badass moment and quite entertaining, but he could have just said, "I'll give you some drugs to help with your withdrawal," and that could have really been that. But although he's violent in the scene, he actually does a deal with a criminal in exchange for information, which Batman doesn't do that often. So in this case, the interrogation isn't as much about violence as it is about doing a deal. So the interrogations do take a lot of different turns. But those are Batman's most violent interrogations in media. I have avoided the comics and mainly just done games, shows and movies, but they're the ones that you can really see the violence in. I mean, seeing it on the page drawn is one thing, but actually seeing it acted out or seeing it in live action, that's something completely different. And personally, my favourite one is him threatening to run someone over with the Batmobile, because it's just such an awesome thing to watch. But which one is your favourite? And are there any other violent interrogations that you think should have been mentioned? Be sure to let us know in the comments, and I'd just like to say a quick thank you to those who made this video possible by donating to the Needle Mouse Productions page on Patreon. And as always, thanks for watching, and feel free to subscribe, share, like, and comment.